Like Asanka mentioned, our next panel covers ways to build a sustainable energy supply for rapidly growing Asia. Moderating this panel, I welcome back Prashant Kandoy. Since he doesn't like bios, I'll just say that he's the managing director of EVO and a key member of our Big Bold Brave community. Joining Prashant for this discussion is Dr. Pradeep Pereira, Kyati Modi, and Salia Vikramasuriya. Dr. Pradeep Pereira is the Principal Energy Specialist at the Asian Development Bank in New South Wales, Australia. He has primarily worked in the energy sector operations in a number of countries and has extensive experience in high level policy dialogue, investment project processing, technical assistance formulation, and country programming for climate change. Kyati Modi is the Chief Operating Officer at Global Fuels. She has over 15 years of dedicated experience in the bunker industry and is a Harvard Business School OPM alum. She has also distinguished herself as an international level car racer and a sports writer. Salia Vikramasuriya holds a degree in engineering physics from Loughborough University of Technology and has nearly 3 decades of experience in the energy sector. He is the former chairman of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation, Ceylon Petroleum Storage Terminals Limited, and a former member of the Colombo Port City Economic Commission. These experts stand at the intersection of growth and sustainability, tackling one of Asia's defining questions, how to fuel prosperity while decarbonizing at scale. Prashant, over to you.
Thanks, Ursula. Good morning, panelists. Super excited to have you here. Meghna, that was quite a performance. So we'll dive straight into our discussions. It's an open question to all the panelists. What do you see as the most immediate challenge South Asia faces in balancing economic growth with energy sustainability? Want to start off?
Yeah, basically, I think there is a sort of a nexus between the economic growth and the energy consumption. So basically, in most of the countries, one can say that the energy consumption has grown in proportion to the economic growth. But I think the energy intensity in most of these countries is coming down. That means that the amount of energy that you need to consume for a unit of economic growth is coming down. For instance, the energy consumption is not growing at the same rate as the economic growth. So now, during the last 20 years or so, the global GDP has grown by around 3.4%, whereas the the energy consumption growth has been less than that. It's about 2.2%. Now, the projections are that in the next 20 or 30 years, the economic growth would probably average around 2.4%, whereas the energy consumption growth would be around 0.3%. That means the energy consumption is hardly going to grow in the next 20, 30 years because of the improvements in the energy efficiency, as well as in certain structural changes in the economies, because as we are moving more into service-oriented economies from industrial economies, there would be a lesser demand for energy per unit of economic growth. But I think this may change, I think, because of this artificial intelligence and the data centers that are going to play a major role in the next decades, which are hugely energy intensive. But I think probably we would be able to break this nexus between the energy consumption and the economic growth. So what really requires is having the energy consumption growth in a more sustainable manner. So the energy consumption may not grow, but even the current level of energy consumption is not sustainable. Because at the moment, our GHG emissions, which are mainly due to energy-related emissions, is around 42 gigatons per year. And for all practical reasons, I think one can say that the emissions have already peaked or about to peak, but it has to decline drastically if we need to keep the global warming below 2 degrees. So even if the emissions continue at the same rate or with a slight decrease, that would not be sufficient to bring down the global warming. So for instance, it is predicted that the emissions under business as usual case would decline to around 32 gigatons by 2050. But that would not be sufficient level of reduction to achieve to ensure that the global warming doesn't increase by more than 2 degrees. So there has to be a significant reduction in the emissions, and that would require significant change in the structural mix, energy mix of of all these countries, so that the emissions would reduce significantly. Although our energy consumption probably would increase or would remain as it is. I think with that I will stop. I think maybe other panelists can.
So, just well on another topic, how critical is the regional cooperation between South Asia and the Middle East in terms of achieving energy security and sustainable goals?
Thanks for the question, Prashant. I'm going to take it a little bit differently by suggesting that we need to analyze. This is a very broad question, and I don't think there's a single answer that captures all modes of cooperation between the Middle East and South Asia. But I'd like to bring the audience in on a different train of thought. Cooperation is vital because cooperation is to do with market, which is to do with supply and demand and business creation. The question is, who's the owner of the benefit? Now, I have to say that in Sri Lanka's case, it's very clear we depend on oil imports from the Middle East ultimately. So in our case, it's not optional; it's mandatory. But what can be done within the region, inter-region, and so on and so forth, it depends on the incentive to do so. Let me share with you a small story. I am a petroleum engineer, despite so somewhat incongruous in this group. And I spent the first 20 years of my life actually finding and producing oil and gas, so which is a bad word these days. And then I spent the next 7 or 8 years of it in my career overseas, that is not in Sri Lanka, getting into the minds of our customers to understand what their decision drivers were in the initiatives that they engaged in, either collaboration, cooperation, business agreements, final investment decisions, etc. And our customers, I worked for Schlumberger, which was the world's largest oilfield services provider, and our customers were big oil. As we all know, that despite everything that's done everywhere else, the ultimate owners of the world still, as far as I'm concerned, are not necessarily in this order, but big pharma, big guns, and big oil. So we've got to really understand what drives them to change their behavior patterns. And unless things have changed in the last few years, big oil certainly. Is there anybody out here from big oil? Anybody representing a major energy company? They don't call themselves big oil anymore. They call themselves big energy. Right. So then this may come as a surprise to you that despite everything else, when your company's future and economic prosperity and shareholder value depends on the classification of your reserves in ground, then the only 2 metrics that you care about, despite all the other metrics that exist, are 2 things. One is called RRR. Let me start with RP, reserves to production. That's just a number. Reserves to production is a number. It's expressed in time. The unit is time. Because reserves is in quantity, production is in quantity per time. So the end result is, how many years can you sustain profitability at this level without your reserves declining? In other words, how long can your stock continue to hold its value in the market based on your filings with the SEC, based on your reserves and the current price of oil? Actually, the current price of oil is just profitability rated, but longevity related is just RP. The next most important metric for an oil and gas company is RRR, reserve replenishment ratio. And this is how much that you produce this year can you replace next year? And I don't mean to bore you with these, but I'm trying to simplify this to the point where we have a meaningful understanding of where the influence centers are to actually change the outcome that we seek to. So RRR ideally should be 1. If you sell 1 barrel of oil or 1 standard cubic foot of gas this year, you want to replace it by next year. That keeps your RP fixed. If your RRR decreases below 1, it means your RP is going to come down in terms of years. I hope this makes sense. So these are the only 2 numbers that really exist in the minds of oil and gas companies, or at least 5, 6, 7 years ago. They don't come up to the fore right now because of social pressure and obviously the well understood and accepted need to decarbonize the planet. Now, you can't decarbonize the planet by putting into the atmosphere, hydrocarbon that you own, on which the future of your company is based. So the biggest motivators, I would say, for big money to come into decarbonization, which is at the bottom of the transition, is that the owners of the assets need to be able to continue to discharge carbon into the atmosphere, and therefore they need to be able to pull it out. So that balance also needs to be created. Just as much as what you pull out from the earth, you find somewhere else and replace it with. What you push into the atmosphere, you pull it out so that you can continue doing the same. Now, this is all a long answer to your question, and I will stop in a moment, but there's a point behind it. Now, what motivates the big movers of the economy? It's really, now after all this 27, 28 years here and there, I then was tasked with stewardship of several government institutions, one of which was the Petroleum Corporation. So that gave me a perspective of government's point of view. Now we are coming a little bit closer to the answer to your question. Collaboration is not only fostered by government, collaboration is fostered by the private sector. Commerce, I think, is the best form of diplomacy, the most enduring form of diplomacy, and it actually supersedes diplomacy at an official government level. A little anecdotal story, and this I will stop after this. Kyati a chance to. Some years ago, when I was in charge of another sector of the petroleum, which is not the downstream side, but the upstream side, a friend of mine who works for a large US oil company was flying on his way to another destination in Papua New Guinea, decided to stop off here because this company and us were having conversations about producing oil and gas. When he stopped here, let's call him Jim. That's not his real name. He was an old friend, so we went out and we had a drink or two, and it suddenly occurred to me to ask him, Jim, have you informed the U.S.? This guy was quite a large, quite a high-level, high-ranking player of a very large company. I said, have you informed the embassy, the US embassy, of your visit? He said, no, why should I? He said, well, it's usually good protocol to do that because just in case you need them. And his answer off the bat was, oh, no, don't worry about that. We don't need embassies need us. Now, by that, when you talk about the Middle East, and we talk about South Asia, there are big companies involved, there are governments involved, and the collaboration between everybody is absolutely important. I could have just said it's very, very important, Prashant, but I just want to give perspective to that answer. It's because it's understanding the movements of the market and the fact that in some instances it's better for the government to be out of the business of being in business, because that creates all sorts of internal policy conflicts, and leave commerce in the hands of the private sector. Government should facilitate and regulate to ensure equity. But ultimately, the truth in the answer, any answer that anybody could give to that question, is what kind of relationships are we talking about? So, yes, we do need to broad base our network, broad base our relationships, bring down trade barriers, facilitate partnerships, cross-border partnerships, energy conversion when it comes to energy, trade when it comes to goods and services. But it's important to actually consider these at a more granular level so that we can specifically knock them off one by one.
Thank you, sir. That was enlightening. Khyati? Private companies often lead in innovation. How do you see the balance between profitability and sustainability playing out in the fuels sector?
Innovation is obviously led a lot by the private sector, but even by the public sector, maybe in a different way through CSR or something. Now, when we say that we are spending money on innovation, it means that we are spending money when we know we will get an outcome. Like, I'll give you a small example. In shipping, we're looking at alternative fuels. We're looking at biogas, we're looking at ammonia, we're looking at LNG. The reason we could actually spend money on that innovation is because we had the confirmation from other ship owners and everybody that we shall adapt your technology. And the reason that they could give us that confirmation and that guarantee that, okay, we will adapt it, because the mindset of the users these days are getting much more towards a sustainable environment. So people today are ready to pay more for a sustainability cause. Now, if the private player did not actually put in so much money towards innovation and did not go for the first step, maybe initially, yes, there is a little bit more money spent, but if you look at the overall picture, like 10 years, 15 years, it always balances out. The money always comes back. You will not be spending it won't be a loss. It'll just be like an appreciating asset in a way.
So, again, an open question. If you could identify one game changer technology or policy for this collaboration between the regional countries, what would you think that would be? Let's start off with you, sir.
It's a tough one. I think we have tried very hard, I think, over the years, I think, to establish a global or a regional carbon market. But it had not worked out because no one wanted to agree for a sort of ceiling on carbon emissions. So that hasn't happened. But I think now this emission trading is happening at a limited level among certain countries, especially in the European Union. So if we could establish some kind of emission trading mechanism among the South Asian countries, I suppose that would enable us to exploit the various competitive advantages different countries have when it comes to emission reduction. Probably a country like Sri Lanka might have certain opportunities, but a different country like Nepal would have a different set of opportunities because they are rich in hydropower. So whatever the emissions that we might have to emit here, we might be able to offset against reductions happening somewhere else. That's probably would reduce the overall cost of emission reduction at a regional level. So that would be one area. Other thing would be you earlier mentioned about this South Asia, Middle East collaboration. So we have been depending on this oil-based trading between Middle Eastern countries and these countries. But going forward, I think the nature of energy trade may change because as all indications are, demand for oil is going to decline. I mean, especially with the adoption of the electric vehicles and electrification of industries, which are required to have this energy transition, there would be lesser demand on oil and to a certain extent on LNG. So I think Middle East has a competitive advantage when it comes to green hydrogen because they have vast amount of land that is available that can be used. So if they can produce green hydrogen, which can be exported to countries like us, where we would be able to use that green hydrogen in energy application. So that kind of sort of change or a sort of mechanism for changing exchanging competitive advantage different countries have would be quite useful. I think the energy electricity transmission interconnections. Let's say Sri Lanka is not connected to any other country at the moment. We are an island, and it's not easy for us to be connected to India, for instance. But now India is connected to Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. We are not. But if we could facilitate the interconnection between Sri Lanka and India, and that would enable us to sort of optimize our energy consumption and energy generation, so that we could be part of a larger grid. That would again be another game-changing kind of opportunity.
So during the last BBB also, we discussed the interconnectivity between India and Sri Lanka as a part of the growing cooperation. In addition to my last question, so what do you think would be a game changer in these areas?
Thanks,
And, you know,
Prashant.
despite the political differences, how do we go about doing this?
Yeah, thank you. I'll build on what my friend Pradeep also said and what Kyati mentioned a little while ago, which was about people paying a premium. Now, that's where I want to start, actually, because it's all commercial, ultimately. And those people who are willing to pay a premium for greener product need to ascertain that these things that they're paying a premium for are, in fact, greener than the alternative. That means they need to have full disclosure or visibility of the supply chain of this product that they're buying, and then correspondingly put either shareholder pressure or voter pressure on the relevant constituencies in order that that value cascades upwards to the people who have to spend the money to produce greener stuff. Now, Pradeep mentioned something very important about carbon. I'm not an expert in carbon trading, but I do know that collectively we are all victims of what we could loosely call the North-South injustice. And from that point of view, we are in some ways being asked to pay the price of earlier, shall we say, earlier on in the Industrial Revolution, when such things were no longer considerations. People made a lot of money and countries became very developed, exploiting without limit reserves of coal and gas and so on and so forth, and oil. Now, in amongst all this, if we can if we can motivate people to actually pay more for greener, that would be the heart of what drives what Dr. Pradeep was talking about. And as it so happens, in September this year, there was a platform launched in Hong Kong. It's a platform called Worldly, that's a company, Worldly Axion, AXION, which allows anybody to drill down to the level of compliance with emissions, greenness, if you like, that big manufacturers subscribe to, countries subscribe to. So you can look at Sri Lanka, you could look at Nike, and then you could actually drill down to the countries in which these companies source their goods from, and down to the site level to understand how compliant they are with expectations and standards. So from that point of view, these are tools that when actually socialized, will allow people to understand what they're actually buying, how much they're paying for it, and motivate the people who are going to spend. Because all of these things, carbon trading, it died with the UN version died with the Kyoto Protocol expiring in 2015. The VCS, I think, is no longer active other than in between individual entities. So there's no motivation for this, which is why it isn't happening. So ultimately, for these things to happen, I would say we do need to understand how to activate the carbon trading market. So I'm aligning with Pradeep. I'm also saying that the only way that'll happen is because of what you said, KRT, which is people need to become aware of what they're asking other people to spend more money on and be willing to pay for it themselves. And I'm not talking about just selling the right to pollute. I'm talking about a collaborative effort to decarbonize the planet because of the perils that were spelled out by the earlier panel. So yes, in summary, we need to be able to globalize, and I mean fully globalize, which is the South and the North, the benefits at every level. And the people or person who can do that will solve this planet's energy problem.
Thank you, sir. So I'll be asking the closing question post this. Just wanted to open up to anybody from the audience. We can take a couple of questions to the extremely learned panelists. If anybody has any question.
This question is in two parts. One is with the oil equation in itself, right? The fact that even if we are able to bring tremendous amount of renewable energy online, today we do not have a replacement for carbon fuels. In that sense, is there a roadmap or a timeline? Not, I think a roadmap is the wrong answer, but a timeline that we can look for where the two lines intersect and we can say that we now have enough renewable energy coming online, and therefore we can look at the decarbonization in a serious way. Or is the world betting on some kind of breakthrough technology like nuclear fusion? And this is the question. The second part of my question is more on data centers. There's a very famous, and I wish I could have asked this of the previous panel as well. There's a very famous video of Eric Schmidt in front of the US Congress asking for 100 gigawatts of new energy required for the AI revolution. I think one of the panelists mentioned 300 megawatts was what one data center was consuming. 1 gigawatt, by the way, for everyone here, is equivalent to the output of one nuclear power plant, which takes 5 to 7 years. They want 100 gigawatts bought online in the next 5 years. So when we're talking about these kind of demand equations, when we're talking about the fact that, hey, do we have a replacement for carbon fuel or not, where does it just boggles my mind. So maybe you guys have more data than me. What's the road ahead? Where is the intersection likely going to happen?
If I may take a crack, I think basically it is now quite obvious that the energy transition is happening. So if you take the electricity sector, I think electricity sector in most of the countries, I think in this region as well as globally, is decarbonizing in a big way. So next 20, 30 years, I think there's going to be a significant reduction in the consumption or the use of coal and to a lesser extent LNG in power generation. I think apart from a few countries like Sri Lanka, no one uses oil for power generation. No country uses, not many countries uses oil for power generation. So oil usage in power generation is virtually, I can say, insignificant, except in Middle East and a few other island nations. So I think the oil reduction in oil consumption is going to happen mainly in the transportation sector with the electric vehicles advances that have been made in the electric vehicle sector. Now I think in recent times, I think about 20% of the new cars that are sold are electric vehicles. This is going to increase, and the railway electrification. So with all these things, I think the oil probably would not have that much of a growth, or I think in absolute terms, oil would decline. Now that is going to happen, and especially it is going to be replaced with electricity in transportation. Now in the industrial sectors also, there has to be electrification in the industrial sector, especially the process heat in the industrial applications would have to come from electricity if we are to decarbonize these industries. like steel and those kind of industries can be switched to green hydrogen, green ammonia. So green ammonia can replace the coke, which is being used in steel industry. That would be a game-changing technology. So, but with these kind of technologies are now being sort of tested, and they are being proven feasible, and it's a matter of commercializing them. Now, with respect to your question about data centers, it's quite new, I think. I mean, it's just started, I think, in most countries. So this 100 gigawatt, I don't know whether that would be the requirement, but certainly it is going to increase. Because data centers probably probably depend on electricity. They don't need process heat. They need basically electricity for air conditioning and cooling. And if we can decarbonize the electricity grid, which is technically feasible now, because electrifying the grid, the electricity generation is quite a feasible thing. The difficult part is electrifying or decarbonizing the industries and transportation. That is also happening, as I mentioned earlier. So I don't see a major issue with the data centers. If we can increase the renewable energy generation or low carbon electricity generation with energy storage, the incremental demand in data centers can be met with renewable energy. So that would not be an issue, in my opinion.
And very quickly, I think Pradeep has articulated perfectly the viewpoint of a particular group of stakeholders, those people like us in this room, including me, who want this to happen. Now, I'm going to put a cap on and be a little disruptive and call myself John D. Rockefeller. And I'm going to take you back 100 years or so and put you in a place where the landowner is the royalty owner. This is the United States of America, which is what gives rise to the drill, baby, drill change of heart in the recent administration. It's because the people who benefit from the drilling are the people who own the land. So fracking, drilling, production, all these things really don't only take off well in places where most of the royalty is owned by most of the landowners. Now, I find myself as John D. Rockefeller looking for ways and means to expand my empire, and I buy up all these concessions, form this massive company called Standard Oil, and it dominates 90% of the global oil trade. And then all of a sudden, in the early 1900s, some cheeky upstart in the United Kingdom produces a battery and a car and says, look, I have an alternative to oil, and I crush it because I don't want it. It's not going to help me one little bit if somebody somewhere else is creating an alternative path for consumers to fulfill their demand as opposed to my oil. Now, okay, my company was broken up by court, US Supreme Court in 1904 or 5 due to the activities of one particular person, this lady. And spawned what we now call the Seven Sisters, one of whom was headed at a certain level by my friend Jim. These guys, they control much of the money that's in circulation in different countries. And their current balance sheet is built on the strength of their oil and gas reserves. It's not built on the future. So we've got to find a way to convince them that it's more economical for them to move from the current dependency of monetizing subsurface reserves, which is it's not demand driven. Of course, Pradeep is right. Nobody burns oil to produce power. Oh, but it's very much economy driven. Who owns the asset? Who derives benefit from selling the asset? And there will be a projected decrease in demand, as you say correctly, Pradeep. But if I was back 100 years, I would do my best to crush it, as people are doing it now. So I think we have to be realistic about understanding the complete value chain. I wouldn't say supply chain, the value chain, and then work on the points that we can. Government can, and for 15 years I was in government, government can put policy pressure But government doesn't control the resources, and government needs to recognize that the best way to do that is to create economic incentive for people to shift. That's all I wanted to add, Prashant. Sorry.
Maybe respond to earlier. I think I think we need to take into account the political economy at stake, because a lot of people have invested a lot of money into the fossil fuel industry, oil as well as coal and this kind of industries, and they need to ensure that their investments are recovered. So I think there would be a lot of resistance, I think, to this energy transition from the vested interests that are involved. So that's where I think the challenge is, and that's where the role of the governments and the civil society comes in. Because just because somebody had made the wrong investment choice, we can't lead we can lead into this catastrophe that is going to happen with the global warming. So oil had played its part. I think the coal had played its part in the industrial revolution. Now I think we are faced with the situation. This kind of energy consumption is not sustainable. So I think that's where the public action is required. And this is also a kind of there are also communities that are dependent on the fossil fuel industry. In Sri Lanka, probably we don't have that much of a fossil fuel industry as to talk about. But if you take countries like China, India, these kind of big coal producing countries, there are millions of people who are dependent on coal and coal related industries, coal mining, coal washing, coal based industrial applications. So I think if we are to move away from these industries, there is going to be people who are going to lose out, and they are going to resist, both the large companies, big money and multinational companies, as well as small people. So that has to be a just energy transition. So everyone would benefit from the energy transition. You can't ensure that everyone would benefit, but there has to be a mechanism to share the cost of energy transition with the people who are going to lose out. Otherwise, there would be a lot of resistance, and it might not happen.
Any closing words from you, Khyati?
Just wanted to add to what you said about the policy making and everything. So, but sometimes the lot of policy is actually market driven. Like I'll give you a small example. In shipping, in marine fuel, the sulfur emission content allowed was 4.5%. In 2012, it got changed to 3.5 because the market was driven. They're like, we're going to find alternative fuels. So that was a market. Oh, sorry. So that was a market pressure that made it 3.5. So after a while, it took about a year to settle down. Once it was settled down, then the IMO, they realized, okay, if the market is ready to accept 3.5, let's actually go towards more sustainable thing. And they decided in 2020, the emission of sulfur can only be up to 0.5%. So sometimes the policymakers fail to understand that they can actually reform market pressure. They can actually pressurize the market to have more innovations as well. So we need a little strict reforms from the policymakers as well.
Katie, it's absolutely correct. It's two-way, because policymakers don't feel the urge to make policy if there isn't any social or political pressure to do so. So I'm well acquainted with the IMO rule, low sulfur rule, because I'm also from the shipping sector as a background. So from that standpoint, I recall clearly everybody saw it coming. Nobody did anything about it until the last few months, when they realized that the IMO was not going to give an extension. And it was a matter of backlogs for scrubbers and so on and so forth. But my point is your first point. The the end consumer must put pressure, either by paying a premium or by using their voice. Now, ExxonMobil, for example, had a holding company level board change enforced, 5 years ago, by pure shareholder pressure, where 2 or 3 of the brownest people were removed, and they were replaced by 3 very green people, and that itself forces Exxon's behavior to change from the top down. So it is all about upward pressure, upward profit, upward benefit, upward anything from the whole of us, because otherwise it's quite easy to fall into the trap of setting policy in a vacuum. That policy which is set in a vacuum will die in a vacuum. So I fully subscribe to what you said. Policy can enforce, but policy needs to have some input that it cannot ignore.
Thank you very much, panelists. I think you're well out of time. So I just have a last question, which we can take it off the stage. And if we were to have this discussion in 2035, what would you like to be achieved or changed in Asia's energy landscape? And we talk about these small modular nuclear reactors. Is that really it is at experimental stage? So is that really going to be possible in times to come? I think these are some questions which I had. Unfortunately, we don't have time for this, but whatever the audience also has some questions, we can take it later off the stage. Thank you very much.
Just one moment, please. Miss Geo, may I ask you to come hand over these gifts? Kitty, Tina. Thanks, Tina.